Previous section we spoke about distance creating signals and calming signals as two separate contexts. Now they're not distinctly different, they're really part of a continuum with a certain fluidity between them. So imagine a graph with stress increasing on one axis and the intensity of the signal increasing on the other. Then your distance creating signals will occupy the top right corner, high amount of stress and quite intense signals. And calming signals will occupy the rest of it, the lower left part of it. So when it comes to calming signals, the contexts vary. At one end are no stress social interactions, and on the other end are quite tense social interactions. On the no stress social interactions, when the signals are used, it's probably meant for maintaining social decorum. So like we use hi, excuse me, thank you, sorry. So perhaps dogs use it to mean something like, hey, I come in peace, I want to be friends. It's not meant to be taken as a literal translation. I'm just trying to paint a picture for you. And in the high stress or tense social situations, they're probably meant to give messages like, you're stressing me out, please calm down, you're being a little impolite or overbearing. Hey, I don't mean harm, you calm down. So basically messages of peace brokering. My teacher too read, this is why she calls them calming signals, and she has a very nice line. She says, the language of dogs is the language of peace. This is not a strict ordering though, there is a fluidity to it. And these signals can be indicative or imperative, meaning it could be to indicate to you how I am feeling, or directing you to act in a certain way based on what is required for this interaction. So in the reading section, you're going to have a list of calming signals. I'd like you to go through it, and there's going to be a worksheet. I'd like you to go through it and work the worksheet before you come back to the next video. So in the worksheet, I'm going to ask you to take a guess. For each of the signals, what do you think is the stress level that the signal is used in? 1 star being no stress social interactions and 5 star being quite tense. Also think about whether the signals are used in close proximity to the one that the dog is signaling to, or at a distance, so near or far. And also think about whether they are signals, so we have CS to indicate calming signals, or stress signs, we have SS to indicate. Stress signs being behavior driven by a physiological change as a response to stress. So that's what I would like for you to think about. Take a guess, write it all down, and we will discuss it in a lot more detail. We'll go through certain set of videos, and we will have a longer discussion. Now remember, this exercise is not meant for you to put these signals in clear boxes and order. It's just to give you an idea of the different kinds of contexts they're used in. But really there's a lot of fluidity in there, and we will discuss this in the next video. Now before we start looking at videos, there are 2 things I want to go over. One is a caveat, and one is a backstory for the videos that we're going to look at. So first the caveat. I know I spoke about a graph kind of an image, and that image is really useful to kind of communicate the idea at large, but one must be careful because that's not exactly the way the signals are used. There isn't a strict ordering there. There's a lot of fluidity in there. For example, some dogs may mix and match signals at different intensity. Some dogs may just skip some signals altogether. Some dogs may go back and forth. Some dogs may have do different things in different situations. Some dogs may use low stress calming signals with high stress vocalizations. So there's really a lot of fluidity in there, and we should not expect a strict ordering of signals. In general, if we see distance creating signals or high stress calming signals, then maybe we need to interfere and take the dog away from that situation. Whereas if we're looking at low stress calming signals, then maybe it's just part of the social decorum and part of the communication that the dogs are using, and perhaps there's not much need for intervening. So it's really important to develop an intuition for these signals rather than just having knowledge. That's what will help us determine if we need to intervene or just take a step back and allow communication to take its course. So with that, we're going to start with looking at some of the videos. Now, before I do, I have to give you the backstory. So the dogs you're going to see in the next set of videos are going to be my dogs, Nishi and Chiro, trying to befriend a group of street dogs comprising of a family, actually comprising of dad and mom, Pops and Red, and the juveniles, Flashy, Loco and Coco. These dogs lived in a sort of a clearing where a bunch of school buses used to be parked, and we used to go there to do our sniffari with our dogs. The streeties did not like our dogs and were quite hostile towards them in the beginning, and we respected that. So we kept a distance of about 800 meters and we stayed on one corner, and we didn't try to push them in any way. But slowly we started observing that one of the juveniles, Flashy, she started approaching our dogs with a seeming curiosity and maybe an intent to befriend. And my dog Nishi, she started reciprocating as well, wanting to try and meet them. My husband Uttam usually walks the dogs, and so he wanted to see where this is going to go, so he would walk Nishi towards Flashy and Flashy would just run away. So though they tried it, it wasn't really going very far. And then I kept observing and I felt like that made sense. Maybe it was a bit much for Flashy to have a big dog like Nishi approach and a big human being like Uttam approach her at the same time. So I asked him to try something. We walk our dogs on a fairly long, light, non-retractable leash, a really long one. So I asked him to stay at the end of that leash and almost turn away. So walk Nishi like that, where it was really Nishi approaching and Uttam was almost disengaged from Flashy. And we did see that Flashy was a little more brave and was approaching a little closer. So on a hunch, we took the leash off to see what would happen, and their friendship blossomed. And it was a joy to watch the whole thing. Nishi is not with us anymore, but she was a wonderful dog. Several years ago, she did have an issue with dog reactivity because of an accident that she had been in. And I'll spare you the details. But what I do want to tell you is that changed quite dramatically. She went from being a dog reactive dog to somebody who not only got along with dogs beautifully, but was also able to convince hostile dogs to drop the hostility and befriend her. And I was fascinated with how she was doing it, because it wasn't really anything I did that got her there. It was all her. There have been a few students who have asked me when I've shown them videos of Nishi saying, hey, this signal that she's using, is this the appropriate signal to use? I don't know. How would I know? I do not have an opinion on it. All I know is that she is able to use those signals very, very effectively. She's able to do her magic. And my job is only to observe, not have an opinion. Just as I can't have an opinion on what is the right word you need to use when you're communicating with somebody, that depends on your cultural context, your language, the way you communicate, what is most effective to you. And I can't be prescriptive about it. My job is only to observe what the dogs are talking about, what they're saying to each other, what signals they're using, and what impact it may be having on their social interaction. And that's what I present to you here. If this approach appeals to you, you're really going to enjoy the rest of this class. So we're going to start with the first signal, curving. Do you see curving in your workbook? What have you written down about it? Quickly jog up your memory on that, and I'll see you in the next video where we look at videos of curving and try to figure out what that might mean. Communication starts right at the approach. Dogs rarely approach each other head-on. It's a soft curve. Pilot studies that were done in Norway and now being done in France show us that when dogs are approached head-on, their pulse actually shoots up, and not so if they're approached in a curve. Observe street dogs. They rarely approach each other head on. It's usually a soft, big curve. They may then decide to close the gap and may even sniff each other's butts, but the approach is usually a curve. And if they do approach each other head on, you can almost expect conflict. Even if the dogs know each other, if they approach each other head on, you can expect rough play. So one way or the other, we're not looking at a calm interaction. So let's see how curving looks when dogs do it. So notice this video and notice particularly Nishi in this video. Nishi is the black dog right at the center, and she's trying to approach the red dog to the left of the screen, and observe how she approaches. Look at her almost walking away a little bit, dipping the head and curving in. Here again, this is the full family, and you can see her walking almost away, like she's disoriented a little bit. And she starts curving in. Here again, that wide curve, dipping the head and curving in. We know that calm dogs approach each other in a curve. And I spoke to you about studies that show that when humans approach dogs, their pulse goes up if approached head on and not so much if they're approached in a curve. So what does that tell us about how we interact with dogs? When approaching dogs, don't do it head on, approach in a curve. It's perhaps their version of a polite approach. And when I interact with dogs, I'd like to be seen as polite. I bet you do too. So do try that out on dogs and see what their response may be. Also try to observe dogs interacting with each other. Off-leash, calm dogs. Street dogs are excellent for this kind of observation. And see how they do it. It may not be this pronounced always, could be a lot more subtle. And I have a video later that shows you how a subtle curve looks. So make it a habit to start observing. Now going back to your workbook, this signal is probably a 1 star. Not too much stress involved. It's part of sort of social decorum in most cases. So 1 star to maybe 2 or 3. Used when approaching. So used from afar when approaching. And not that much of a stress sign really. It's not a physiological reaction to stress. So more with the intent of signaling. So more of a calming signal. So the next video we're going to look at, we will be talking about sit and lying down. So when Nishi approaches streeties, Nishi is a big dog as you've seen compared to the streeties. So the streeties can get quite nervous. What do? They sit or lie down. Puppies do this quite frequently actually, but adult dogs do this too, particularly with us. When we're getting angry with them or scolding them, maybe as a way of showing their vulnerability, I'm a small puppy, don't hurt me. So let's see how that look on video when dogs do it. So this brown blob here that you see at the bottom of the screen, this is a young dog called Oscar, and he's quite nervous about Nishi. You'll see how he reacts. So you can see him sitting. And you can see he's nervous. His ears are pulled back, whites of the eye showing, and he's going to bolt in a second. There. This is Loco lying down, and this is Flashy lying down. We see these signals too in many situations, apart from if we're just being intimidating or yelling at them. Even when they're stressed, we see this in our pet dogs. So I'll give you an example. I was once walking my sister's dog, Bella, and this was in San Francisco, and we were going down a street and suddenly she just stopped. She could not walk anymore. She sat down, and no matter what I did, she just did not want to go any further. Now I couldn't see what was stressing her out, but something was probably stressing her out. And when they use it in this context, it can indicate quite a bit of stress. So if you look at your workbook, sitting is probably 3 to 4 stars, and lying down higher still, maybe 4 to 5 stars. And they could be used when the stressor is close to them, or what they're signaling to is close to them or further away. It could be an imperative signal or indicative, and it's unlikely that it's a physiological response to a stressor. It's more likely used with the intent of signaling. So what could have been stressing Bella out? What I did is I sat down. She's a short dog, so I sat down to look at the street from her perspective, and I found it interesting. So that particular part of the pavement or footpath, there had been, people had put pots on either side of the road, big pots that were somewhat shaped like that. So it was creating this cave kind of a structure that was caving in, and Bella was finding it hard to pass. We know dogs find it hard to pass in those kind of structures. They can get nervous about it. So I crossed over to the other side of the street, and she was able to walk. Sometimes it may be as simple as that if we saw it from their perspective. I was talking about this in class, and one of my students once asked me, she said, Sindoor, when I take my dog back home after a walk, he doesn't want to go back up, and I thought he was being stubborn. Do you think it's a calming signal? Maybe. So she asked me, what do you think is stressing him out? I don't know, I'm not there. So I asked her to go look at it and figure it out. So she couldn't figure it out, but she decided to try something else. The apartment that she was entering had a flight of stairs in the front that she was trying to take. She instead decided to go back up through the back stairs, and problem solved. He wasn't sitting anymore. And then we were able to figure it out. So the stairs that went up in the front, they were dark and steep, and the dog could not manage. And this happens to many dogs, struggle with steep, dark spaces. Whereas the stairs on the back, they had a set of grills on the back. So there was a lot of sunlight streaming in, no problem. She tried to take the lift or the elevator, no problem. The sad thing is, often this can get misinterpreted as a dog being stubborn or adamant. And then we start getting angry with the dog, scolding the dog, or even get annoyed with the dog, which can stress the dogs out. And then what do? Escalate, lie down. And that feeds back into our story that the dog is being stubborn or adamant. And it leads to a lot of unpleasantness for the dog and for us too. Sometimes it's good to look at this from another perspective. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe something is stressing them out. Can we look at the world from their perspective, and will something jump out at us? Maybe not. Maybe we won't get it. Could we still give them the benefit of the doubt? Could we still try to do some things a little differently? That might just solve the problem without the need for any unpleasantness. So that's how you would look at this signal and try to interpret it. In the next video, we're going to talk about freezing. So, if a dog freezes, what is Nishi's response to it? What does she think is appropriate? So let's watch this video. Now, this is where we left off in the previous video. So we saw in the previous video Flashy lying down because she was a little nervous. What does Nishi do? So that's Flashy lying down and Nishi's frozen. Here again, those dogs are nervous and she's frozen for quite a while actually, and then she moves again. Here again, she's frozen with head turn. Completely frozen, and watch the front right paw up. We'll come to that in a bit, but frozen with head turns. Freezing can actually be used in two contexts. One is the way Nishi is using it here. Maybe as a way to say, hey, I am not a threat. I remember this one particular story. We were out on a walk. I was walking Chiru. My husband Uttam was walking Nishi. And I had gone a little ahead and I turned back and looked, and somehow Nishi had found herself between three street dogs. The three of them were lying about 2.5 feet away from each other in a triangle, and she had found herself in the center somehow, and the dogs did not like it and they were growling. So three street dogs right there, And Nishi, because of her accident, had a few issues. She couldn't open her jaw very much. So if the dog's attacked, she is defenseless. So you can imagine why this could be so stressful for me. So I turned around and I started furiously signaling to Uttam saying, get her out of there. And he was quite still and he was like, just watch her. And I watched what she was doing after I managed to sort of bottle down my panic, and I watched her and she was managing. She had completely frozen with her head turned and she just stood there, and the attention started diffusing a little bit, and once they stopped growling, she backed off slowly and then shook herself, that wonderful shake, the shake that is known to actually reduce pulse in the French study that they've done. Shook herself off and walked away with this, that was stressful kind of a thing. Now, we can also use it in similar situations. You may have heard other professionals talk about this too. If a dog is coming charging at you, it's usually called be a tree. What they're talking about is completely freezing with the head turned, eyes averted, and just stand still till the situation diffuses. And that's sort of the way Nishi is using it, and we can replicate it. So it still is used in somewhat of a high stress situation, so 4-5 stars, used usually in proximity of whoever you're trying to signal this to, and it is meant mostly for signaling, not as much physiological response. The other context in which freezing is used, what we call the long freeze, that is more of when the dog is experiencing incredible amount of stress. So, you've heard of a deer caught in headlight, the way they freeze. So that's kind of the context in which it is used. So in our daily lives, we are quite likely to see this kind of a freeze in a particular situation. What might that be? Can you think of it? I'm going to ask you to think about pausing the video and think about this and see if you can come up with a few situations. So the example that I can think of, and where I see it the most, is at the vets. So many dogs completely freeze up at the vets because it is so stressful. It smells of stress and death for a lot of these dogs. I've heard a lot of clients say, oh, my dog is so stressed out till I go to the vet, but once I get there, he's perfectly fine. He's not perfectly fine. He has completely frozen when you put him on the table. And this is indicative of quite high levels of stress, maybe 5 or maybe even upwards. And this is unlikely to be signaling at this point. This may even be a physiological response. Some interesting things happen to their heart rate and things like that. And the dog may just be a snap away from a bite as well. So misunderstanding this signal can be so dangerous. And I've also seen people misuse this. I saw a photographer once giving advice. If you want the dog to stand still and get great pictures, put the dog on a high table, especially small dogs on a high table. Putting the dog through this amount of stress for what? For Instagram likes? That sounds incredibly unethical to me, but also just unsafe. And this is why this signal is so important. And if you see the long freeze, it definitely is a call for action. We really need to be doing something about it. Whereas if you see it in the context of communication, maybe something needs to be done. Maybe you can allow the communication to take its course. That's a bit more of an intuitive feel for it. And that's why you need to observe this a lot more. So next time you're at a vet's or any place where dogs are handled a lot, pay close attention. Do you see these signals? Do you see when the dog is getting quite close to snapping? And we're going to move on to the next video now. And the next video is about head turns. You already saw that in this video. We're going to look at it a little bit more and talk about it a little bit. So we're going to be talking about head turns. We already saw Nishi use this, and we're going to look at videos. Now I have to point out this one too can be used in somewhat two different contexts. One is the way she freezes and turns her head away to say, hey, I mean no threat. And the other is to say, I don't like what you're doing. I don't like the way you're interacting. So you'll see Nishi use this a lot when the puppies are being a little bit annoying and jumping on her face. You'll see a lot of those head turns. So let's have a look at the video. There she is with turn to the right, turn to the right again. This puppy is being quite annoying. So right and then left, right, left, left again. And both of them have their head turned here. Dogs use this on us too. Can you guess where? Again, consider putting this video on mute and thinking about it. Where have you seen it? Usually, it is when we try to take their pictures. Dogs, animals in general, don't like us leaning over and shoving something in their face and trying to take pictures. Well, we wouldn't like it either if somebody much bigger was leaning down and shoving something in our face. And so you're likely to see a lot of head turns and a few other signals. Or when we try to hug them. We may love hugging them, but dogs usually don't. Most animals don't. Our dogs may tolerate it, but that doesn't mean they like it. And we really need to pay attention to this. This signal is interesting in that it can almost range from a 1-star stress to almost up to a 5-star too. And it's meant to be for signaling and usually used in close proximity to what is stressing them out. And this is particularly important to watch out when there are children around and they're hugging them, because of this wide range, if they're already sort of at the high level of stress, they're not enjoying it, they've signaled multiple times, they're just having a bad day, it takes very little to snap. And sadly with children, their face and neck is so close to a dog's mouth, it can be really disastrous. And we don't want to take that risk, because at the end of the day, if something happens, it's the child and the dog that pays the price. And the adults, those of us who are meant to supervise, who are meant to take responsibility here, we're just left with guilt and pain. Of course, they use it on us too, and that doesn't necessarily mean they love it. As I said, they could be tolerating it. And the example I ask people to think of is, many of us probably have that one relative who turns up at family functions and is a big hugger. And we may tolerate it because of the love we feel for that person, but we may not actually enjoy that interaction that much. And with our dogs, do we really want to be putting them in a place where they're tolerating us and our interaction because of the love they have for us? Shouldn't they also be enjoying the interaction that they have with us? Some of them are probably not the kind of dogs that appreciate hugs, just like some of us people aren't. And I would love your company a lot better if you understood that I don't appreciate hugs and interacted with me in a way that I appreciate. I would like to be like that with my dogs, and they will definitely love you more for it and appreciate you. And this signal can also escalate. So if dogs feel more stress, they may go from just turning their head to turning their whole body or even walking away. And when we start seeing it escalate, we absolutely need to do something about it. And if they're walking away, we need to give them the space to walk away from it. And this is really critical even from a perspective of modeling good behavior for children, so that they look at us and observe and understand that when an animal starts walking away, you really need to let them walk away. It's the only safe thing to do. We can use this signal on them as well. So one context is the way I mentioned earlier is if a dog is charging at you, you could freeze and turn your head. And the other is to let them know that you do not appreciate how they're interacting with you, so you could just turn your head away. But of course, this usage will require a little better understanding of dog behavior, what drives behavior, what needs they're trying to meet, etc., which we do not cover in this class. But you can still try it and see how it works. Let's say your dog is licking your face. Now, I don't have a problem with the dog licking my face, but believe it or not, I am actually allergic to dog saliva, so I can't let them lick my face. And so what I do when they try to lick my face is I just turn my head away. So you can try it in that context, and particularly with calm dogs, and see how that works. And this signal is actually can be quite fun to work with too, very easy to observe because it's used a lot by dogs, it's used on each other, they use it on us, we can use it with them to communicate a lot of everyday messages. So play around with it, start using it and see, observe dogs and see how they are using it, how they're reacting to it being used on them, and how they respond to it. That's the whole point of this class. Just keep observing these things in different contexts. If everything has been going well so far, the dogs have approached each other politely, the streeties have shown what they do not like in Nishi and she has responded appropriately. She has shown what she does not like and they have responded appropriately. Then we are likely to see a play bow. Now this signal is hard to miss and quite easy to interpret. It's an invitation to play. Come play with me. Now this too is likely to have two variations. One is what you saw, a lot of lateral movement, and this is kind of used in a play context, an invitation to play, or even used during play to communicate play intent. Hey, don't worry, I didn't mean to hurt you, we're just playing. That kind of communication. The other, which is a little more lacking in lateral movement, just held, that position is held, that's more likely used as a calming signal. So you're likely to see that if, let's say, young dogs are getting a bit rambunctious and an older dog might step in and hold that position and just give that position and hold it as a way of saying, all of you need to calm down. So that's likely more of a calming signal. And in both contexts, not too much stress, in fact more of play, so maybe a 1-star, 2-star, again used in proximity, not used at a distance, and highly unlikely to be a physiological response to stress. And obviously it's not something that we can use in either context. Sometimes they even get scared if we try to use it, so I won't try using this signal in any way. This is just one to observe and enjoy. So that's it on play bow. This is a really simple one and it's so loud, it's just fun to watch. When dogs start playing, not everything may go great. Some dogs may start breaking social norms and decorum. Now in these situations, it's common to see an adult dog or a mature dog step in and do something called a splitting. They could step into the entire group and break the whole group up, or step in between two dogs and then stand in defense of one of the dogs. So let's see how that's going to look. Here is Nishi breaking the whole group up. Now these two are getting too excited. Pop steps in, standing in defense of his puppy, and Nishi steps in, standing in defense of her Chiru. I absolutely love this video and this signal. And we can use this too in somewhat similar context. So if your dog is getting upset about something, a monster that only he sees, you can step in between the dog and his monster. But you have to remember, stand with your back facing the dog, hands out, palm facing the dog, and your front facing this monster. The pilot studies that have been done in Norway and in France actually show that this actually drops heart rate, so it might help them calm down and feel a bit more secure in insecure situations. But of course, it may not work in some situations. It does require that you have a better understanding of where this behavior is coming from and the origin of behaviors, which of course we do not cover in this class, but it does not stop you from trying it out in different situations where you feel your dog is getting a bit stressed, and see how it helps the dog. Dogs use this on us too. So can you think of where? You're likely to have seen this. Again, pause the video and think about it. And think about where you might have seen it. When we hug each other, you're likely to have seen a dog come right in between. Full frontal approach is a very ape thing. It's not something that dogs are comfortable with. Full frontal approach, like I said, can lead to conflict in the dog world. So some dogs may be getting a little anxious that the interaction between their two humans that they value the most is going to lead to some kind of a conflict, which does not bode well for them. So they might be stepping in to diffuse the situation and peace broker there. I remember having a couple coming in for a consultation very early on, and it was quite hilarious because they started explaining, when they were hemming and hawing, and they were taking a really long time to articulate what the problem is. When the dog comes, when I just decided to put them out of their misery and had to tell them, okay, listen, I know what you're talking about. It's not that your dog is trying to be part of your sex lives or something like that. It's just the dog is splitting, trying to diffuse what he perceives as possible conflict. So you may have seen it in situations like that. And the dogs need reassurance in that situation just to know that it's not leading to conflict. So we probably are going to see this signal in stress situations 1 to 3 or 2 to 4 kind of a thing, used mostly for signaling really. It could be used in proximity, or it could be used when they suspect that there is a stressor at a distance. So it could be near or far. So there are a few different contexts in which this is used. The next signal we're going to be talking about is sniffing. Sniffing from the perspective of signaling, but also sniffing from the perspective of stress response. In the previous video, we saw that adult dogs can often step in and regulate play, but dogs are capable of self-regulating too in several situations, particularly calm dogs. So if the play gets a little too exciting, they may just break up the play and drop their head and start doing something that looks like sniffing. Now, there's nothing specific for them to sniff. So it doesn't seem like it's about sniffing something. It seems like it's the act of sniffing itself, that very act of dropping the head and sniffing, that seems to be relevant in this context. So let's see how that looks. So here you see all of them suddenly sniffing, and there's nothing to sniff. These two are getting a little too excited. Nishi walks in, splits, she drops her head and she's sniffing. They calm down a little bit and there they sniff too. So this could be used again in two ways. One is to calm themselves down and the other is to signal. So we do have the studies, the pilot studies that show us that when they sniff, their heart rate drops down. And there are similar studies done on human beings and other animals too. We know that breathing reduces the heart rate. So in a way, this may be their version of yoga or dog pranayama. So that's one context where they're trying to calm themselves down. And the other is when they're actually trying to signal. So that may be used as well. I'll give you an example that suggests that it could be used in that way. So one morning I was out doing my street dog studies, as part of my street dog studies, and I saw a group of street dogs standing really still and staring at a wall. Now, I'd never seen these guys in that particular area. I'd been visiting that place for more than a year, so I was quite familiar with all the dogs there. But these guys were new, and they were just standing completely still and staring at a blank wall. And that looked strange to me, so I just parked my bicycle there and I started walking up towards them as quietly as possible to see what was going on. And then they did something interesting. Suddenly, one by one, they started moving to the right, to somewhat of a grassy patch, to the right, and they started sniffing there. And then suddenly they just turned around and walked off to the left and just walked away. that didn't make sense. So I went closer to this patch to see what was going on, and then suddenly it fell into place. So right in front of this patch, the wall that I spoke about that they were staring at, there was a break in the wall. And on the other side of the wall, I could see two dogs, Caesar and Peewee. Now these are regular residents of this place. They're the regular streeties, they live there. And those dogs had been barking, which wasn't audible to me when I was away. I only heard it when I got closer. Obviously, I don't have hearing like a dog. And what the other dogs that I was talking about, they are probably tourist dogs passing by, or trespassers, call them what you may. Let's call them tourists, let's be nice to them. So these tourist dogs were probably passing by. Caesar and Peewee were giving off barking signals there, saying, hey, you're in our territory. So what has most likely happened there was that these dogs sort of walked to a place which was within the line of sight of the dogs that were barking, sniff, 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 maybe a calming signal, hey, calm down, showed a white flag kind of a thing, and then walked off on their merry way. They were just passing by this territory as a group. So that's how the signal could be used. Rather, sniffing could be used as for signaling. I have seen Nishi and Chiru do this too, especially in the early days when they were getting to know Flashy and her family. They would get out of the car and they would sniff, sniff, sniff a lot within the line of sight of the other dogs, and then approach them slowly and in a curve. And maybe it served a purpose, maybe it was helping them calm themselves down before this interaction. It could go either ways, and it's not entirely clear which one it could be always. But often there is some source of either a stressor or a social interaction that's likely to happen around. So I've heard clients sometimes when they're walking their dog and they see a bunch of streeties at a distance that are barking, and they will say, look at my dog, he's such an idiot. He doesn't seem to be realizing there are dogs right here. He's in his own world and he's sniffing in his own world. I feel like asking them, who is the idiot here? Because it's not that your dog hasn't noticed those dogs. He has noticed those dogs. He noticed them a while ago actually, and he has started sniffing here, maybe as a way to signal or maybe as a way to calm himself down in the situation. So we need to pay attention to these things. And sometimes when they start sniffing, it could be used as a displacement behavior as well. I'm stressed about something, so I start fidgeting. Humans, we use it too. When we're stressed about something, we may fidget, or we may start doing something that seems unrelated, and that's just a way of coping with stress. So it could be used as a displacement behavior too. So in terms of stress levels, this could vary from anywhere at a 1 star, again, right up to 4, 5 stars too. It can be used in close proximity, it can be used at a distance. Sniffing is visible at a distance, so it's quite frequently used when there is a stressor at a distance. And like I said, it could be used from a signaling perspective or a physiological response to stress as a way of coping. So that could be the context as well. And it is really important to observe this, because sometimes when we are walking our dogs, this is the way they might start indicating that something is a bit stressful, and we may have to act on it. We may have to take them away from that situation. So I have another video to show you. This is somewhat of a recent video. One of my students sent it in when she was practicing leash walking, and you'll notice sniffing being used in 2 contexts, and this is somewhat interesting. So context number 1, the dog suddenly starts noticing that there's something on the other end of the path that he's walking on, and that starts stressing him out. So you start seeing him give signals, he starts sniffing, and the lady walking him doesn't notice that. So she continues to sort of walk on that path, and he's struggling to cope with it. She eventually gets it, and they take another route. But it'll be great if you're able to notice this quickly and say, okay, I can see that you're getting stressed about something. We can just go another way so that you don't have to escalate these signals and maybe even react. And the other situation that you'll notice it in is, so this lady wants the dog to walk in one direction, but he doesn't. He wants to walk in another. And that's because he's in between cars. And I think that wasn't working for him. The spaces were very narrow. So he insists and he walks in a different direction. And then as soon as he gets out, he dips his head and he starts sniffing immediately. So let's have a look at this video and see if you can see all of this. So you can notice already in the dog's stance that he is nervous about something and he is observing something. You can see how tense he is. Something at the end of that corridor is stressing him out, and there he is sniffing. He would have appreciated if they walked away entirely. He does not want to proceed, so he's curving again and sniffing again. And there is him peeing because it got too stressful. They're continuing to walk forward. That's not working for him. He wants to walk away. She does not let him walk away, but that's not working for him. And he finally manages to convince her to walk away. So you can notice here, this is the tight space that he's uncomfortable in, and let's see what happens. He wants to get out of this tight space. He's not comfortable. She doesn't let him do that, but he is not willing to follow her. He insists. He walks out of that tight space and there, right there, sniffing again. Perhaps as a way to calm himself down because that got too stressful, and then he found something interesting to sniff. So that's how you would look out for sniffing, and you saw it being used in a few different contexts, possibly a signaling context, possibly a way to deal with stress, and of course because something is interesting. Dogs are creatures of their nose, so they like to sniff different smells, and it lights up their brain like a Christmas tree. So mental enrichment too. But that's what we need to do, is pay attention to it. It was really evident in the first part of this video that the dog's attention was on something else. So it wasn't sniffing for the sake of it. He kept turning and looking in that direction. So pay attention to it. Maybe there is something there that he's trying to tell you. Maybe you just need to go in a different direction, and that might avoid him a lot of stressors. And will make the walk a lot more pleasant too for everybody involved. So now we come to another set of signals that dogs are quite likely to use on us. They use it on each other too, but we're very likely to see them using it on us. So blinking, licking of the lips, and of course we already spoke about head turns. We'll talk about that in this context, and yawning. So go back. We've looked at a lot of videos of dogs using signals on each other. In this section, we're going to look a little bit more at signals that they're quite likely to use on us. Not that they don't use it on each other, but they do use it quite extensively on us, and so I have footage of them using it on us. And when are we likely to see it? Like I mentioned earlier, when we're trying to take pictures, when we're trying to hug them, we see a lot of this, and because they get caught on camera, they're quite easy to just observe them. So the signals in this category here are yawning, licking of the lips, blinking, and head turns. Let's see how that looks. I have pictures. So here you can see blinking and turning of the head. Here you see licking lips and blinking, yawning and blinking. Of course, they use these signals with each other too. So this is a video of a dog using yawning when they're playing with each other. There you see that yawn. Here again the dog right at the front, and there is that yawn. And then there is licking of the lips. Now you have to watch this video really carefully because it's very, very subtle. So watch the tongue, blink and you'll miss it. There you see the tongue out, 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 out. So if you've noticed something about these videos, these signals are a lot more subtle than the signals that we have spoken about thus far. And also, Nishi doesn't feature that much in these videos. It's more of Chiru, my other dog. The signals Nishi uses tend to be big and loud, if you may. You'll also notice that dark dogs tend to lick their lips more and not use that much of blinking, whereas light dogs blink more, especially dogs with well-defined eyes. Why might that be? Think about it. We'll discuss it more in the next video. Meanwhile, these signals, there are quite a few and they have quite a varied range. So they could be used in low levels of stress like 1 or 2 star, but they are also known to be used in high levels of stress. Many of them are used for signaling, but yawning, it could be a physiological response to stress. It could be, we know that we yawn too, and we know that our heart rate can drop when we yawn. So it could be a way of coping. But most of these tend to be used when in proximity of who they're signaling or what's stressing them out, because they're so small and so subtle. So thus far, we've looked at a bunch of signals: licking of the lips, blinking, looking away, head turn, turning the body, walking away. I have to refer to my list here so that I know what signals that we have covered. We have covered yawning, play bar. That's a huge list, so that's why I need to refer. Sitting, curving, sniffing, freezing, lying down. Now we're going to look at a few more signals. So we start with lifting of the paw. You already saw that in one video where Nishi lifted her paw. I do have another interesting video to show you on that. This is probably not associated with high levels of stress, and it can be used at proximity, but I've also seen dogs, for example, if they're sniffing something and they suspect that there's something at a distance or that may cause them stress, or what they're sniffing is interesting, I find them tend to kind of lift their paw, almost like they're in a pensive state, and then you see one paw come up. And of course, that's different from what pointers do. This is calming signals that most breeds are capable of doing, and it can be in their repertoire. The next signal I'd like to talk about is dogs walking in slow motion. Now, that is different from the stalking that they do. When they're stalking, you're going to sort of see that incredible shoulder action, and they kind of go down a little bit. That's not what we're talking about here. It's normal walking, but they tend to do it in slow motion. And when they may do this when they suspect, again, something at a distance. In India, I've seen it when dogs see a cow at a distance and they get a little stressed about it. There's that slow motion walking. So I'm not entirely sure at what levels of stress they're likely to use this. I'm suspecting it can be in the entire range and used at a distance. And again, it's unlikely to be a stress response, so more of a meant for signaling. The next one is puppy face. We've all seen this, where they kind of pull their ears back and round up their face a little bit, make their eyes very big. So they could use this. The most common context we have seen them use this is when they're trying to beg for something. So you see that look come out. But they can also use it when we are being harsh and intimidating. So as a way of showing vulnerability, I'm a little puppy, please don't hurt me, I don't understand what's going on. So you may get that look, and that's a bit more of a sad context, and that might tell us, hey, the dog is finding this a little bit much. Maybe we should think about doing this another way. And the next signal is smiling. It's not exactly a smile, that's why I'm putting it in air quotes. It's when they retract their lips back. It may be a signal, it could also be a stress sign, but it's definitely, you see that at slightly higher levels of stress. So 3-4 star maybe. And a lot of people misunderstand this. And again, something that I've seen people use to get great photographs. So put them in situations that are a little stressful, get them to retract their lips like that, and then take a picture, and we love saying that our dog is smiling, but that's unlikely the case. So watch out, some situations where those lips are retracted, it may not be a dog in a great state of mind. It may actually be a dog that is a little stressed out. And then the next signal is showing off the belly. I do want to have a slightly longer discussion on this, so I will come back to it towards the end of this section. Before I do, I want to talk about two more things. One is stress signs and displacement behaviors. Now let's talk about stress signs. Now stress signs are a little different from calming signals in that the intent there may not be to signal. It's more of a physiological response to a stressor that they are experiencing within their body. And that could be because of overstimulation or something that's scary or frightening them. So it could be anxiety or excitement, and it leads to somewhat similar physiological response in the body, and so we're likely to see these signs. And though they're not used for signaling, it can still be useful to us when we look at our dogs to see what's happening within their body and their minds. So in this category, we're likely to see peeing, pooping, and when I say pooping, it could be loose diarrhea, loose stools, constipation, shedding, dandruff, dilation of the pupils, tightening of the muscles, fast breathing, panting, humping, and there are a few others. And then there are displacement behaviors, what typically present as fiddling. Something is stressing them out and they are preoccupied with doing something that's unrelated. So they may pick up something in the mouth, they may shred things up, they may start digging, they may start sniffing. Sniffing could be a displacement behavior too. And those can also suggest to us that they're experiencing something that's bothering them or something that's getting them agitated or aroused in some way. I'd like to talk a little bit more about dilation of pupils, tightening of the muscles, and breathing. Now, this is something I use a lot when I do myotherapy. Myotherapy, for those of you who don't know it, is something like sports massage on dogs. And for those of you who have had sports massage, you know how painful it can get. So when my teacher Julia was visiting me, she first tried these techniques on me, and I was screaming in pain. And then I turned and I looked at her and I said, "You do know you're going to be trying these on dogs and they have big teeth. You know this, right?" And I've seen that she doesn't use muzzles and restraints of any kind. And when you're massaging them, your face is so close to them. So I said, "Are you sure this is safe?" And she said to me, "Not only am I going to be safe, the dogs are going to turn around and ask me for this. You watch." And she was right. And once I learned how to do this, I realized how to actually get dogs to respond this way. So the first case study I did was on a Rottweiler who had a bite history, and he had severe pain in his hips. And so all of that made for a really bad cocktail, and I was terrified. So I called my mentor and I asked her, I said, "What should I do? I don't know what to be doing tomorrow. I have this case study and I'm terrified." And she said, "Just listen to the dog. Do what the dog asks you to do and you'll be fine." I didn't entirely understand what she was saying at that point, but the next day I knew what I had to be doing, and then subsequently I've learned. So what I do is I pay attention to these signals. What I do is, let's say that the dog is carrying the most amount of pain on the back. That's the area they do not want you to touch, but they will let you touch some other area. So I start work on this other area and I watch them really carefully. If I see so much of a change in breath, or the muscles tighten, or the pupils dilate, I move away from that area. And that makes them understand what I'm trying to tell them is, hey, you don't have to growl or bite me, okay? I'm listening. If that's uncomfortable, I will not touch that area. I will move away from it. And that builds confidence in what I'm doing. They gain confidence. So if you've had a good massage, you'll know that good masseurs also do this. They are able to really pay very close attention to your muscles, and if you start tightening, they move away from that area as a way for you to relax, because when you do massage, the muscles need to be relaxed, otherwise you can't do much work. So you need the animal to relax, and you can come back to that area slowly, working your way. So that's kind of the technique that I use, and that's where I pay attention to these. And what's interesting is when I do that, when I'm paying that kind of attention, when I'm not pushing the dog, repeatedly what I see is once they gain confidence that, okay, you're not pushing too far, then they turn around and offer their most painful side. Okay, now that I have confidence in you, work on this area. That's where it hurts the most. So I get them actually turn around. We call it the buy-in, and once I get the buy-in, the dog actually turns around and says, work on this area. So for those of you who do hands-on work with your dog, these signals are likely to be really useful, and you can use it in somewhat this context. Next, ears and tails. I have not spoken about this if you have noticed. Dogs do use their ears and tails to communicate, but there isn't a somewhat of a global consensus on what it means. For example, there are different kinds of tail wags. There is the relaxed tail wag, there is the stiff tail wag, there is just the tip wagging, there is the rotation clockwise, anti-clockwise. And with the ears, some dogs, when they get excited, ears may go up, some dogs' ears may go out, and I've seen some dogs go like that, one up and one out. When they're afraid, their ears may go back. Some dogs, when they feel affection, they may put their ears back. So there's really a lot of variation in there, and there are several experts who are trying to determine what these may mean. But at this point, we still don't have consensus among sufficient number of experts for me to actually have a high degree of confidence in what they may mean. And therefore, I kind of leave those out because I do not want to risk people misinterpreting it. That could lead to some dire consequences. For example, I've heard people say, oh, Sindoor, I saw the tail wagging and I thought the dog was fine, but the dog bit me. That kind of a misinterpretation I don't want, and therefore I've left it out of this course, and hopefully maybe in due time we're going to have a better understanding of these things, and maybe there'll be another course on it. So for now I stick to calming signals and distance creating signals because there's a better understanding and more of a consensus across most experts on roughly what they mean, though everybody has a slightly different way of explaining it or what they call it. But roughly we know that they're used in different states of stress, and we know that we need to act in some situations. And finally, showing of the belly. This is something I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to cover it in a little bit more depth because this is something that can be misinterpreted quite a bit. Now, puppies use this a lot to show their vulnerability. Our dogs may use it on us, and that might be because they're in a chilled out state of mind, they trust us a lot, so it could be just a lazy, or rub my belly, and that's just wonderful. But we shouldn't be putting them in that situation and asking that of them, because that puts them in a state of extreme vulnerability, and it's something that an individual can offer only when they feel ready for it and only with somebody that they're ready to offer it to. We shouldn't be asking them of them because we're kind of forcing them to do something that they may not be ready for. And some dogs may simply not be ready to do it. They're not the kind of dogs that show belly at all. They're not in that state of mind at that point in time. And it can be extremely stressful, almost to the point where they feel like you're about to kill them kind of a thing. So that's something I won't do. When I see a dog offer it to their own people, their own humans, and I see that kind of a lazy turning around, that's wonderful. It tells me that they have a great relationship and the dog is in a great state of mind. But when I see a dog, an adult dog, offer the signal to a random stranger that they've never met before, then it starts making me wonder, why is this dog feeling the need? Dogs use this signal almost in a place where they're saying, please don't kill me. That's kind of this situation that they're using it in. Why are you doing this hands up thing and saying, don't kill me, to a stranger? What has your life experience been that you feel like the first thing you need to do when you see a stranger is to say, don't kill me? And a story kind of explains this to me. It puts this in perspective. So there was this man that I visited. He wanted to do business with me, some kind of a dog food thing. I'm glad I never did business with him because I learned a few things about him. It's an uncomfortable story for me to tell. As soon as I went to his house, and this was my first meeting with him, he opened the door and a beautiful boxer came up to the door and then just flopped on the ground, flipped around, turned on the belly and peed on himself. Why would he do that? Why would he put himself in such a vulnerable place the first thing to a stranger? That didn't make sense. It didn't sit right with me. And then I went on to have spent some time in his house, and the dog was skinny, and this man kept gloating about how the food that he was feeding the dog was so wonderful, that the dog was eating kilos and kilos of the food and was still so skinny, and that didn't add up either. But something didn't sit right with me. Thankfully, it didn't work out. That business idea didn't work out. But years later, one night, he called me, and this was just the second time he was calling me. And he called me late at night and he just started abusing me. That didn't make any sense. Why would you call a stranger and talk like this? So I then reached out to some common friends and I found out about him. And what I found chilled me to my bones. This man has had a history of abuse, abusing his dog, abusing the people in his house. Thank God I didn't associate with him. But that dog told me about him. That dog's worldview was so pessimistic because he was living in the house of an abuser. I am not suggesting that we take these dogs and these signals and jump to conclusions, but I am suggesting that we need to listen because there's information in these signals, and sometimes they can direct our next line of inquiry. They can tell us which direction to look. I have another similar story for you coming up later. But I'm going to step away from the unpleasantness of this and talk about the next section that we're going to look at. We are going to be looking at these videos, these signals being used in real life contexts and how dogs use it on each other. So we have some wonderful, lovely signals to look at and videos to look at.